Great. So hello, everyone, and thank you for being here. My name is Paul D'Ambrosio, and I teach Chinese philosophy at East China Normal University, where the 四海为学 Collaborative Learning Project is based. Today, I want to welcome you to our second event of 2025. We have Professor Jenny Hung from the University of Hong Kong, from Hong Kong University of Science and Technology, Professor Joo-hyeon Oh from the University of Minnesota, and Professor Michael Nylan from UC Berkeley, here to engage on a roundtable, very much open, titled Considering Non-Humans. We also have a chair today, Dr. Li Luyao from Peking University. It's become a tradition here at 四海为学 to give younger scholars a chance to be part of high-profile academic events by inviting them to take part as chairs or discussants. So if there are any younger scholars here who wish to be part of future events, please email me. This event will be 2 hours total, ending promptly at 10 a.m. Beijing time. The general schedule is one speaker will speak and then talk with the other two speakers, the next speaker, the same thing. And then at the end of that, we'll open up for comments from the audience. Before getting things started and handing them over to Dr. Lu Yao, I want to say a few things about the 四海为学 Collaborative Learning Academic Forum. The 四海为学 Collaborative Learning Project hopes to distinguish itself from some of the less productive conventional practices in contemporary academia. As posted on our website, we are not interested in male peacocks, in jerks, or in any form of egoism or self-promotion. We hope to curb all types of aggressive and "look at me, I'm smarter than you," or "don't I know so much," and similar attitudes sometimes found in academic exchanges. We might even go so far as to say that we hope to be the counterbalance for the negative attitudes sometimes found in blind reviews. There's a time and a place for anonymity, or at least the appearance of anonymity. Communication in academia should have just as much time and place for speaking to one another in more congenial and community-forming settings. The neologism 四海为学, which was created by Robin Wong, is a play on 四海为家, and we hope to keep this 四海为家 idea very much at the foreground of all of our events. The 四海为学 Collaborative Learning Project seeks to accomplish these shifts in orientation during academic exchange by encouraging productive communication, humble discussions, real questions, and responses that are open and honest. We hope to foster environments where we truly learn from and with one another. So I know Professor Michael Nylan very well, Joo-hyeon Oh a little bit, and Jenny Hung not so much. But from what I do know of these people, they're all really excellent examples of the attitude that 四海为学 hopes to promote in academia. So that's part of the reason the topic and the format are so open today. And we're really, really happy to have the three of you. We're also very happy to have our chair, who helps 四海为学 in all sorts of ways, Dr. Li Luyao. Dr. Lu Yao is a postdoc fellow at Peking University in the Department of Philosophy and Religious Studies. She earned her PhD from Nanyang Technical University in the Department of Philosophy, and her research interests include Taoism, comparative philosophy, and political philosophy, with a special focus on coexistence of harmony and freedom in the Zhuangzi. We're very happy to have you here, Dr. Lu Yao. The floor is yours.
Thank you, Paul. It's great to join this to be a part of 四海为学 project. And please allow me to introduce our first speaker, Jenny Hung. Jenny Hung is an assistant prof of philosophy at the Hong Kong University of Science and Technology. She has 2 PhDs, one on philosophy and another on nanophysics. She investigates the nature of self from both Western and Eastern perspectives aiming to answer the most fundamental questions on human existence, such as what are we? How do we persist? She published in Philosophical Psychology, Philosophy East and West, Dao, a journal of comparative philosophy, Asian philosophy, a history of philosophy and logic, and so on. She's now working on 2 books. The first one is Between Buddha, Nature, and Emptiness, the peak era of Chinese Buddhism. And also the second book, What Am I? Personal Ontology in Chinese philosophy. Philosophy. Uh, yeah. Then, the floor is yours, please.
Thank you so much for Luya's introduction. And let me take some time to share my slide first. So can you see the slides?
Absolutely.
Yeah.
Great. Thank you so much. So today I'm going to talk about the value of consciousness in early Buddhism. It is related to our topic of 四海为学to date because I will be talking about the question of whether it is better for us to be zombies or philosophical zombies or to attain nirvana according to early Buddhism. And I will introduce the idea of zombies, which is a kind of non-human because it has all the behaviors and actions or functions similar to that of a human being, but it is without phenomenal consciousness. So I'm going to dig into the question of which is better, being a zombie or attaining nirvana. So to begin, here's a question about what is valuable. When I say, for example, eating is valuable, the reason of saying that eating is valuable is because it supplies us for energy, right? So there is an answer for the question of why eating food is valuable. There's a reason. But we can further ask the question, why having energy is valuable? And there's a further reason for that. I can say having energy is valuable because energy provides me for the energy to do something. For example, to write a book. And writing a book is valuable. And I can further ask the question, why writing a book is valuable, and so on and so forth. It seems that this question cannot go on infinitely. So there must be an end. So where is the end? And the end is the question of what is intrinsically valuable. So what does it mean to say that something is intrinsically valuable? Here is many philosophers' definition. They say something has intrinsic value if that thing is good or bad for its own sake. And there is no further evaluative grounds to appeal to explain why that thing is good. So here is our question. Is consciousness intrinsically valuable? So what is consciousness? How to define it? When I talk about consciousness in this talk, I refer to what the philosophers call phenomenal consciousness. So when you're having phenomenal consciousness, you're experiencing something. For example, you see colors, you hear the sound of air conditioning, you feel happy, you think about a math problem. All these are examples of having phenomenal consciousness. You have a subjective, qualitative, first-person experience. So back to the question of consciousness. Is consciousness intrinsically valuable? So here are some private questions related to this question to help you understand why philosophers ask about this. So is life treating you well? Do you want to be conscious even if life is not treating you well, so you're suffering? Do you prefer to be a person, or you prefer to be an unconscious machine, an AI, or a zombie? So many philosophers nowadays think that consciousness is intrinsically valuable. One of them is Thomas Nagel. He says life is worth living even when the bad elements of experience are plentiful. But what about early Buddhism? So I have two questions to answer. First question, for early Buddhism, is consciousness intrinsically valuable? And the second question, which is better, being zombies or attaining nirvana? In other words, is being a conscious human good or bad? So what is a zombie? Basically, philosophers define zombies as beings physically and behaviorally indistinguishable from an actual human, but it lacks consciousness. So here is my answer. I will explain why. The first answer to the first question is, for early Buddhism, consciousness is not intrinsically valuable. The second answer to the second question, which is better, being zombies or attaining nirvana? My answer is being zombies, which is very surprising. I'll explain why I have this conclusion. Now, so what is early Buddhism? Early Buddhism, also called three-sectarian Buddhism, is the Buddhist school existed before the various early Buddhist schools developed, and it is regarded as the ideas and practices of Gautama Buddha himself. And the basic text which scholars rely on are the Chinese arguments. So here are the texts, the classic. So when we read the arguments, we found this passage. It says, pleasant feeling, painful feeling, neither painful nor pleasant feeling, all is suffering, perishable and disintegrating. So one loses one's passion for these feelings. And also, pleasant feeling should be seen as painful. Painful feeling should be seen as a dart shooting you. And neither painful nor pleasant feeling should be seen as impermanent. So all of these three kinds of feelings actually are suffering, including pleasant feelings. So you can conclude that all three kinds of experience are disvaluable because of the transient nature. If one craves for pleasant and is aversive of the painful, it produces even more suffering. Also, here you can see the Buddha says, whatever is felt is included in suffering, including pleasant feelings, because of the impermanence of formations, destruction, vanishing, fading away, cessation, and change. So here's a graph representing early Buddhist views of consciousness. So you can see painful experience here. You can see pleasurable experience here. All these experiences are viewed as having negative value, negative intrinsic value. Of course, painful feeling has even more negative intrinsic value than pleasurable experience. So I have answered the first question, namely, I say early Buddhism views consciousness as intrinsically disvaluable. So here is question 2. For early Buddhism, which would be better, being zombies or attaining nirvana? So what is a zombie? So if you poke a zombie with a sharp object, actually it would not feel any pain. It would behave exactly the way a conscious human would, but it is not a human because it has no phenomenal consciousness. What is nibbana or nirvana? It means the extinction of fire. So there are two kinds of nibbana. Nibbana with residue, meaning that the extinction of lust, hatred, and delusion attained by the enlightened one, which is called Arhat, while alive. So the Arhat is still alive, but he doesn't have lust, hatred, and delusion anymore. And also, there is nirvana without residue, which means the remainderless cessation of all conditioned existence that occurs within after the arhat or the enlightened death. So after he dies, there is no more of the five aggregates, including consciousness. So I don't think I need to dig into the details of the quotation. So he is nirvana with residue. So he is nirvana without residue. So let us skip the quotations. So basically, nirvana with residue is that your mind is just being aware of your experiences, including various feelings, like pleasant feelings, unpleasant feelings, neither pleasant nor unpleasant feelings. But you don't crave or you don't be aversive of any of these experiences. This is nirvana with residue. And nirvana without residue means after an arhat or the enlightened one ceases to exist after death, there is no more consciousness. So there is no more experience. And according to early Buddhism, this is even better. This is the ultimate goal, to cease to exist anymore, or to cease the activities of the five aggregates such that there is no more rebirth, no more form of existence. So, which is better, attaining nirvana or transforming to a zombie? We have to first answer the question, which is better, nirvana with residue or nirvana without residue? So nirvana with residue is being aware of all the experiences without craving for or being aversive of any of them. But given that early Buddhism thinks that all experiences are intrinsically disvaluable, the answer is actually not having any experience is better than nirvana with residue. So being a zombie is better than nirvana with residue. So what about nirvana without residue? Nirvana with residue is better than nirvana with residue because nirvana without residue, there is no rebirth, there is no experience, and therefore there is no suffering. And it is very similar to a zombie because by definition, a zombie has no phenomenal consciousness, thus it has no experience, no rebirth, and there is no suffering. But it is functionally intact, meaning that this zombie can interact with others in the world and act as if it has conscious experience. So what is good about being a zombie? Well, in Buddhism, there's the idea of helping others to reduce suffering. So transforming to a zombie is as good as attaining nibbana without residue, and I think it may even be better if the zombie helps others to reduce suffering. It has the function. So the picture is like that. If all sentient beings are zombies, at the first place, there's no suffering at all. So there is no need for there to be a human being to help others to reduce suffering because there is no suffering at all. But given that in this world, there are already sentient beings and they are already suffering, it is good to have one single sentient being who is enlightened and who can help others to realize the Four Noble Truths. And it is necessarily the case that this enlightened one is sentient, because otherwise she won't be able to tell others why life is suffering. So it seems that there's instrumental value of consciousness. We need a sentient being to tell others the Four Noble Truths. Otherwise, if all beings are not non-humans or are zombies in the first place, there is no need for any human beings to exist. So, for early Buddhism, which would be better, being zombies or attaining nirvana? My answer is being zombie for this person is better. So here's my summary. I have tried to answer two questions. First question, For early Buddhism, is consciousness intrinsically valuable? My answer is no. Consciousness is intrinsically disvaluable. The second question is, which is better, being zombies or attaining nirvana? My answer is, for early Buddhism, maybe being zombie is better. Thank you so much. That's all for my presentation. Lu Yao, you muted. You have muted.
Oh, sorry. Thank you, Professor Hong, for a presentation. And here is our discussion section. We have 20 minutes, and Professor Nylan and Dr. Hong, you could present your comments first, and Professor Hong, Professor Hong, if you would like to reply to them, yeah, you could just reply and discuss with them. So, Professor Nylan, would you like to go first?
I guess I'd like to go first. Thank you. I have two big questions, or maybe three. One is, what is early Buddhism? And this is coming out of a friendship with Tim Barrett, who has persuaded me that we know almost nothing about early Buddhism. That by the time we know anything about Buddhism, schools have already developed and they're already interacting with each other. But that really for the Buddha, it takes several hundred years for things to be written down. So that would be my first question. And it's a question that can occur, of course, in many other traditions. We don't know anything about Kongzi, and yet many teachings are ascribed to him. And many people would say we don't know much about Jesus either. So that would be question number one. And it's a big question, and you might just say, I don't want to talk about it. It's too big of a question. I guess the second question is the notion of consciousness that you are putting forward not very much a particular notion of a historically bounded notion of consciousness? And what I mean by that is an early modern notion of consciousness. When you gave your presentation, which I enjoyed quite a bit, suddenly it reminded me that you said, you see this, you hear this, and everything is moving in one direction, rather than in resonance theory, which is so pervasive, not only in China, but in northern India at the time, and also in the Mediterranean. So that would be question number two. What consciousness are you dealing with? And then I guess my third question would be that the logical conclusion from all of this is that ideally we should become arhats, who are such extreme ascetics that they become inured to any sensation whatsoever. And I just wonder if you think, I guess I'm a historian, so I'm thinking always about real people in real time. I just wonder if you think that this is a prescription that would have much meaning for most people. I'm not just saying, is it hard to be a Buddhist, which I think it is probably hard to be a Buddhist, judging from my Buddhist friends. I'm really asking if this kind of a prescription, what particular circumstances or what group of people would this appeal to? So those are three big questions. And I think it's because I have many friends who are devout Buddhists, but I don't have a Buddhist bone in my body. So this really comes from ignorance, but I'd really like to hear your answers for these questions. Thanks.
Yeah, thank you, Professor Nylan. Professor Hong, you could just respond to Professor Nylan's question.
Or not.
Thank you.
Jenny, you don't have to answer anything.
Thank you for Professor Nylan's wonderful questions. And so I'm not a historian.
Mhm.
And so, well, I have myself personally practiced the Buddhism, and my Buddhist teacher, he claims himself to be an early Buddhist.
Ah,
Well, so that is why I have an interest in doing early Buddhist research. And so I'm just following him in defining early Buddhism as those which is written in Chinese agamas, the four agamas,
mhm.
without any commentaries. The just reading the agamas is what I define early Buddhism is. But this may be not the best definition of what early Buddhism is.
Okay,
And
so
I haven't really investigated historically how to define early Buddhism or something like that.
okay.
Yeah.
Don't worry about that question. Okay. Now, could you think about what I'm saying to you with the other two questions?
Yes. And so the second question, how should I define consciousness? And so I'm also working on analytic philosophy, which is the stream of philosophy in the US and the UK and other uh, Anglo-American countries.
Mhm.
And they emphasize on more kind of logical arguments, analysis kind of methodology. And so there is a paper, Kinds of Consciousness, written by NetBlock, NetBlock. I think it is like 15 years ago, and he defines 4 kinds of consciousness: phenomenal consciousness, assessed consciousness. Sorry, my memory is not very good.
Doesn't matter.
So he defines 4 kinds.
Mhm.
So I can only remember the first 2, which is phenomenal and assess. Maybe somebody can remind me of the rest of the 2, if you can come up with them. So he defines phenomenal consciousness as what it is like. And it is something like first person qualitative aspect of our experience. So when you talk about a bat, so you can imagine there is something it is like to be a bat.
Yes.
You have your
Oh,
subjective
example.
feeling of being a bat, something like that. And for NetBlock, this is the phenomenal consciousness he defines. And so in this presentation, I try to define phenomenal consciousness using NetBlock's definition, and I haven't created a new definition for phenomenal consciousness. So I'm not really aware of other definitions throughout the history of philosophy. Because of my limitation of my background. So,
Well, we're all limited. Don't worry about that.
So I just use his definition.
Okay.
Yeah.
So now,
And
who does this idea appeal to, that it would be better to be a zombie?
yes. So yeah, this is how I come up with my question for this paper, because I'm very interested in value of life, meaning of life, and why should we continue to live. And I think phenomenal consciousness is directly related to existence. So when I say, if I'm not a human being anymore, if I am an AI, if an AI does not have phenomenal consciousness, even if you upload all my psychology, memories, dispositions, characters, what have you, into a computer, if that computer is not phenomenally conscious, I think I cease to exist. That's the end of me. So I think phenomenal consciousness is the most important for my existence, and that's why I keep thinking about how early Buddhism thinks about the value of consciousness. And my answer is, it seems like early Buddhism says being humans is undesirable because we have phenomenal consciousness. We suffer. So phenomenal consciousness is disvaluable. So it's like it is better not to exist anymore, to escape from rebirth, the endless, infinite cycle of rebirth. And that's why I think early Buddhism holds the view that maybe it is better for us to be zombies, because early Buddhism thinks that it is good to help others, it is good to contribute to society and have positive impact on others, alleviate pain for others. All these are good, are valuable, but consciousness itself is valuable. So what is the best situation? It is for us to be zombies, because zombies can have functions. It can help others while not being conscious. So it sounds very strange to say that there exists a religion that advises to be zombies. But I think that really exists such a religion, which is early Buddhism. And so, so that's why I come up with this page. And regarding Professor Nylan's third question, so is the early Buddhist prescription suitable for most people? It is a very hard question, and I think early Buddhism is very hard to practice, and it's very hard to keep not craving for anything or not being aversive of anything, just being aware of your experiences. All this is very difficult to achieve, and that's why, historically speaking, early Buddhism declines and Mahayana Buddhism arises. Mahayana Buddhism stress less on, you know, not having any desires or keeping a very austere, isolated monastic life or practicing ethical conduct in a strict sense. So all these are disadvantages of early Buddhism. And I think it is the reason why it declines after a few centuries. So you are right in pointing out maybe early Buddhism has its own pitfalls, difficult to practice, too ideal. And that leads to a lot of, problems in spreading early Buddhism. And that's why there is Mahayana Buddhism emphasizing that we do not need to have an austere life. We do not need to withdraw from personal relationships. We do not need to withdraw from many desires. So it is more attainable for common people. So that's why I agree with Professor Nylan about the criticism of early Buddhism. That's all for my answer. Thank you.
Thank you.
Yeah, thank you, Professor Hon. So Dr. On, would you like to present your comments?
Oh, sure. Yeah. Actually, I was about to ask about the consciousness, which Professor Nana already asked. And well, two things. One is I was wondering how you came up with this project. Maybe you already kind of described, because it's pretty intriguing. Oh, am I not being heard?
No, you are.
I can hear you.
Okay,
I can
good,
hear.
good. Yeah, sorry. Yeah. And probably more interesting question is, the zombie, how we in a popular imagination, for instance, if we think about the movies, right? Movies of zombies, all the humans that died off or were infected by all these terrible viruses, and they become very dangerous zombies who basically is almost the opposite of helping people, right? But then and then now there are also some different versions of zombie movies where there are only zombies that exist. And then listening to your presentation, I was thinking, well, if zombies and humans, as we are, exist in a mixed state, then it presents a lot of problem. Maybe if all of us are just zombies, then maybe it won't be as dangerous. But I don't know. But then basically I was wondering, so zombie, the way that you kind of hypothesize is basically it's functionally intact, very interesting way of describing, but without the consciousness, but everything else kind of like human, right? Well, then for instance, 僵尸, something that we sometimes translated zombies in Qing Dynasty, 志怪与笔记, people die, right? And then when they die, the clear parts of humans kind of, they fly away first. And then the most corrupt essence of humans leave because they are, they're heavier and thicker. And so when they come alive and become 僵尸, they're pretty dangerous because they basically just possess bad, almost animalistic, instinctual features of humans, right? So if zombies are like that, like if the consciousness serves as something that controls, consciously controls certain impulses, sometimes dangerous impulses or instincts as humans, and once you remove that, if only these instincts are kind of active, then is it still better to be zombies than being in nirvana, for instance? I think it's a pretty interesting question. And I also wonder, so why do we imagine typically zombies as these dangerous things? And even in Qing Dynasty, people kind of imagined it as a fearful things, when we can also imagine zombie as something that's pretty harmless. I was actually thinking about robotomy, the surgery that people used to do in the early 20th century. You do something with the brain, and then people kind of become emotionless. They're sometimes, if it works, they're supposed to make you kind of calm and emotionless, and you listen to everyone else's order pretty well, not depressed anymore, right? So that's kind of zombie, I guess. So yeah, I just not really questions or comments, but then something that I was thinking about. Very interesting thoughts that were invoked by your presentation. But yeah, what if there are different zombies? Yeah.
I see. Thank you for your wonderful questions. Should I answer it now or?
Yeah,
If you
you have
want,
2 minutes. Sorry.
Okay. Yeah, thank you for the wonderful questions. And so yes, when philosophers use the term zombies, it is used very differently from those movies. So why they have the idea of zombies is because they want to investigate the nature of phenomenal consciousness. There is a philosopher called David Chalmers. He's now in his 60s, I think, and he challenges physicalism. Physicalism is the view that everything is physical, including consciousness. And he challenges this idea by letting us think about the possibility of zombies. He says, well, we can imagine a being which has all the functions, all the psychology, behavioral, all the features that are indistinguishable from human beings. But this being does not have phenomenal consciousness. And he says it is imaginable, and he also thinks that it is possible. So if this is possible, then the very notion of phenomenal consciousness, conceptually speaking, cannot be reduced to the idea of physical properties or physical functions. So conceptually speaking, we have to differentiate phenomenal consciousness from any psychological or functional or behavioral descriptions. And this is his project, kind of dualistic project, highlighting the idea that the concept of phenomenal consciousness is different from the concept of physical functions or psychological functions. So he doesn't have a negative implication when he uses the idea of zombies. And that is why when I talk about Buddhist zombies, I also have the idea of these kind of beings, which is functionally, psychologically, behaviorally indistinguishable from humans, and yet lacking phenomenal consciousness. So it doesn't have any negative, um, negative idea of a zombie, such as what you have mentioned, impulses, only having instinctual features, lacking lacking free will, lacking control over one's behaviors, etc. They're very different ideas in the films, the movies, and in the philosophical discussions. But to answer your question, if the zombies which appears in the world can only be instinctual beings lacking control over their actions and only having impulses like sexual desires or instinctual bodily desires, then maybe it is not beneficial for the rest of the beings to have this kind of
Okay.
instinctual zombies to exist in this world. And you're right in pointing out that, well, maybe different kinds of zombies would bring different impacts to society. And so what I have in mind are zombies that act as if they are enlightened. They don't have hatred, cravings. They don't have, that kind of bad things that are described in the Buddhist literature, such that they can help others. And they act altruistically
But why would
because they realize
do
there is
that?
no self.
Why
Yes,
would
sorry?
they want to do, why would they want to help? That's what I don't understand.
Well, there is a story behind why Buddhism has the idea of compassion or altruistic tendency. So, in brief, the idea is that, first of all, Buddhism claims that there is no self.
Sorry,
So, here,
Professor Hun.
yes,
Our time is up. I have
time
to
is up.
interrupt.
Okay,
Uh,
okay,
please allow me to introduce our second speaker,
okay,
Dr. Joo-hyeon Oh. We still have time for the free discussion. Yeah. I'm sorry.
okay.
Dr. Wu is a culture and intellectual historian and historian of natural science of late Imperial China. She is particularly interested in understanding the ways of seeing, thinking, and explaining the world of things outside the moral self, what we usually call the natural world, as they were anchored in the culture and intellectual history debate about how to gain knowledge. Dr. Un received her PhD in History and East Asian Languages from Harvard University and is currently a postdoctoral associate in the History Department of the University of Maidstone, Twin City. Dr. Un, you would have 10 minutes to present, and then we have 10 minutes for each speaker to comment. We have 10 minutes for other two participants to comment and discuss. So the floor is yours, please.
Okay. Hi. It's first time for me to be in a roundtable, so I wasn't sure what to do. So I just decided to just really talk and think loudly about things because that's basically what I was most interested in doing the research. But I can only talk about things in late Imperial China because I'm a historian of late Imperial China, particularly Ming-Qing times, although I think the trends that I talk about is continuing from Song and Yuan period. So this Ming and Qing, especially the late Ming infatuation with things, is something that scholars have discussed in many, many books. Very interesting and engaging scholarship. People talk about market economy, commerce, collecting of things, connoisseurship. Novels like Jin Ping Mei, full of things, are being produced in this time. And for instance, like Feng Menglong's Baihua Xiaoshuo is filled with material details that you wonder why, because they actually don't have meanings, but it's fun, right? And I thought about, and I read all the scholarship, and I had to figure out what I could do with my interest in things. And I decided to explore epistemological aspect of this infatuation with things that I and other people observed in this time period. So if you think about this very famous episode of Wang Yangming looking at the bamboo, which Wang Yangming thought was told that, well, you investigate things to attain this knowledge, ultimate knowledge about Li. So he decided, okay, well, I'll stare at bamboo and perhaps I'll learn everything. So he was sitting and then looking at the bamboo, and he didn't learn anything. He only got sick, right? So that's a famous episode. And of course, the point of his story is that, well, looking at things outside of your body, actually, it doesn't work. You actually have to focus on internally to this innate good nature in human mind or heart. But what I thought was very interesting about that was this particular impulse to grasp really literally at a random thing, because and for an enlightenment, right? Because that is a quite peculiar behavior to do, this idea. So this tells, I thought, something about the pathos of this period. And this very literal take on investigation of things didn't mean that you read the words of sages or you think about the moral nature of mind, but then actually you look at a thing and then, well, you investigate and hoping to get Li out of this. I thought that was very interesting. And actually, I think that also reflects some of the very important and interesting developments in intellectual and cultural developments of that time. So someone like Fang Yizhi, a very important thinker of the time, attempted to kind of flush out his vision of scholarships centered on the study of things in 物理小时, which is usually translated notes on things, right? Basically, that book is filled with very small, well, not long, but mostly short excerpts that talk about various things. And he has categories starting from heaven, ending with the Taoist practices and ghosts and spirits. It has all sorts of things. So I think really aloud about things as the source of knowledge or this little individual entry points to ultimate knowledge, which they called Li, in the Imperial China. And of course, we start with Chengzhu Neo-Confucianism and the idea of 格物清理 or 格物 就是 investigating things and extending knowledge, investigating things and exhausting the coherence, the principle, however you call it. But what I was interested was the practices of it rather than the metaphysics, because actually, if you read the text, for instance, Cheng brothers' text or Zhu Xi's writings about how to do this Go thing, it's actually pretty mystifying. Like, how are you actually supposed to study things and get at this seemingly very abstract thing that actually gets never clearly stated what it actually means, Li, right? So I was a little tired about this metaphysics of Go and then all these ideas about knowledge. So I decided to read and figure out what kind of practices are actually involved in this thing called Go, which historians of science in early modern China are very invested because it seems to signal a certain development of scientific attitudes and knowledge. So first of all, 格物, what does it mean to 格 something? We translate it as investigation, but what does it actually entail as a means of gaining knowledge? And second part is basically 物, right? 格物, what to look? What kinds of things to investigate? Like everything? Is it impossible to investigate everything for a person? And things in general? How do we account for individual differences, divergences, peculiarities, anomalies, if we just are supposed to generally talk about everything? So how to find balance between the particular and the general, the abstract seems to be the core. And I think based on my reading of a bunch of some groups of scholars, imperial scholars, it seems like they struggled to how to figure out how to balance between the two and abstract and thorough these particulars, broad particulars, and get at this abstract goal of attaining coherence. I don't think they solved it because I couldn't quite get it. I don't think they solved it, but then I think what is actually interesting is how they actually write about this particular things itself. Abstraction is interested less to me. It just because it actually doesn't say much, but then how they actually write about it, how they debate about peculiar things, and they talk about all sorts of things. That was really interesting. So things narrowly conceived, you can think about material physical objects, and material culture usually deal with things in such a way. But then things as broadly conceived, it actually seriously includes everything. So for instance, Fang Yizhi, I think he's referring to classics, but he said, 应天地间皆物也. So everything that feels in the world is basically a thing. Event, 事, that's a thing. And then machines a thing, tools a thing, mind is a thing, life is a thing, fate is a thing, and 天地, the heaven and earth is a thing. Everything is a thing. So you look at everything in order to understand something that's very important in understanding how the world operates. So basically, what he was saying, Boris Fang Yizhi was saying was, therefore, it is worth looking at every single thing. So he tried to do that in Uli Xiaoshi, but then he's pretty limited. Anyways, some things can be studied more straightforwardly than others because they can be beheld, observed, and investigated, like trees, stones, birds, and animals, flowers, man-made things, and objects. But some other things you really can't. And I think those things are really interesting because all these scholarships on the development of scientific attitudes, they really place focus on the empirical observations, the careful observations. And so they point out that, oh, see, they are observing things. So we have this precocious development of science. And then the problem is, that the modern science gets, it doesn't have this native development. So I think it's kind of unproductive to think in that way. But what is really interesting actually is to recognize this non-universality, basically this distinctiveness, this differences in culture and social across the society, cultures, and times, in what it means to be empirical. What did it mean to what kind of criteria people had when they were evaluating what is considered empirical valid evidence, how to process it. Because when you try to analyze how they process the so-called empirical data, that's when the differences, crucial differences in episteme comes in, right? Because the system of knowledge that they grew up and the tradition of knowledge and literature that they were exposed to, everything's that, and the ways of seeing and sensibilities in processing what counts as real. And what is possible to happen in this world. All of those things come together, and that shapes how people analyze these simple facts. And that's what I think constitutes the study of natural knowledge. So I was mostly writing about things like thunder and lightning, because you see it, but it's so quick, it just disappears right away. So people do observe, but then it's so momentary. So, and also you can't touch it because it's not tangible. So when a late imperial scholars say, well, you talk about all these observable fragmentary things about thunder and lightning, and yet they say, well, what we should do is we should consider lightning as a thing, and treat it as such, and then go on to explain it, then it becomes very interesting. And then when all discourses on what it means to treat and how to treat these material evidences, whether those things can be obtained, and actually they do obtain tangible evidences, and how they process it, and what seemed true to them. It may look frivolous and superstitious and perhaps imaginative, fantastic to us, but in fact, it wasn't. So you have to, I think, the fascinating part of the study of things, especially the strange, somewhat difficult to study things in late Imperial China, I think, is basically comes from the fact that we have to kind of crisscross various genres of knowledge, fiction, Neo-Confucianism, Buddhist studies, Taoist studies, religion, folklore, and many things combined. So I rambled, but then I think that's basically was a very interesting central part of the elite investigation of things in late Imperial China, because many people these elites, they publish their own collection of writings, and if you look at it, a lot of a big volume of it is considered BG. And if you look at those BG, they talk about all sorts of things. And so they were thinking about it. And one is that I think so just 2 points to be, I think, argued from this is one is that, and therefore I think intellectual historians should actually take seriously this kind of really rich source of knowledge about the intellectual culture of the time, because they are fragmentary, and so it is kind of hard to analyze it systematically. But actually they talk to each other, and not only to each other, but then to the tradition coming before. And then they challenge it, they reevaluate it, and that's how they create the new kind of knowledge that gets expanded. So I think it's just a big loss for us intellectual historians to kind of gloss over it as lacking intellectual substance, as usually being said. And the second part of it is, even outside of this kind of narrow framework of intellectual history, I think the one thing that gets not really talked about is the fun part of it. This intellectual entertainment of entertaining these various possibilities of, well, are there ghosts? Why are there how does it work that the marionettes, some of them in certain provinces, they came alive? How come? I'll explain, and then they explain, and others refute. That's pretty fun, and they keep writing about it. They read each other's, they respond to each other's. It's maybe it's not a serious Kaozheng style orthodox way of engaging in intellectual discourses, but I think it was a vital part, and it's actually, it kind of diversifies and energizes the whole picture of what we perceive as Ming and Qing intellectual world. Because sometimes it's kind of boring if you just talk about Kaozheng and the Neo-Confucian debates, which I try to veer away from, but I actually had to engage with, because these people's intellectual backgrounds and reasonings were very firmly anchored in that tradition, whether they disagree or agree with that. Yeah, am
Sorry,
I?
Dr. Oh, yeah, our time.
Yeah.
Time
Yes.
is up. So yeah, we have 15 minutes for discussion. Professor Horn, would you like to go first?
Yes. So I'm very interested in the notion of 格物, the investigation of things. So as I understand Wang Yangming, he's a philosopher of life, aiming to achieve the understanding that we are the one body with the universe. And so I have several questions regarding the practical aspect of 格物, the understanding of things. So first of all, why 格物, the practice of 格物 can help us achieve self-cultivation and the understanding of things as united with us, like 一体, one body with all the rest of the world. How is it achievable? So when you say, when I have investigation of things, I understand particularity and generality. Like this is a thing, but it belongs to a category. So it seems that when we understand things, we understand particularity. So how is the unity of things achievable? This is the first question. And the second question is, so so when I have knowledge about all these things, how they work, so for example, the the bamboo. So I understand how bamboo grows, and I understand how should I water the bamboos in order for the bamboo to foster, etc. So why are these knowledge of everything related to the ethical consideration of how we should pursue ultimate goal of life, such as to become 圣人, sages? So I think Wang Yangming has the ultimate concern of becoming sages. And so can you explain a little bit more about the relationship between investigation of things and becoming sages? So this is the second question. Thank you so much.
Yeah, actually, I think it's kind of a big one question. And I can't claim to be an expert on Wang Yangming. So yeah, but the general, in fact, okay, so the moral cultivation part, the idea of how Go leads to this moral cultivation, which is the I think mainstream and also the main interest of most of the Neo-Confucians, is that the idea is that Li is for instance, Peterson, he translates this as coherence, right? Unity, as in with capital character, English character. And then basically the idea is this Li, it's basically everything that you see, everything in this universe, including the humans, including trees and bamboos and everything, basically they're one in this big universal unity. So when you understand this order or unified pattern of things, Li, in one thing, it actually is not different from Li that you will find in yourself, for instance, because it's human and heaven and earth are one, right? Basically, the idea comes from that. So the reason why Go is important was because you're supposed to find this big capital P principle or unity or coherence in some ways. So in order to get that, you have to investigate various things that contains that kernels of truth, which individually they are actually, if you really get it in an enlightened way, you will discover that they are unified in this big coherence, the order, the way that universe is ordered. So the Neo-Confucian, Chengzhu, especially Zhuxi's way of teaching is that the reason why it's so important that a scholar accomplishes that understanding of Li and recognize that order of things is that you have to see that so that and know that the pattern, the ordered pattern, so that you restore the order, that great natural order in human society. Basically, that is your moral task as a shi, right? So it's first is the moral cultivation in yourself, so that you become ET with this great moral coherence. So this coherence Li thing is actually moral idea principally. It's just that the people that I was looking at who started to really emerge from late Ming period, they start to really kind of investigate it as, well, not concerned with the moral concerns of Li, but I want to treat Li as epistemological ideas. So knowledge for the sake of knowledge, right? But then most of the times the Neo-Confucian take is knowledge for the sake of moral cultivation. And Li was critical in that. And how is unity of things achievable? I think they thought it was kind of achievable, and therefore that's why you strive for it. Because human society simply doesn't have it, so you strive for it because it is achievable if you do reach at that Li, and then basically restore it in accordance to it. But actually, that how is unity of things achievable itself? I think it was being challenged from at least as early as mid-Ming, because actually people started to ask, well, is the world really in unity? is the world really coherent? Because they actually look at all these different things and they're all so different. And so they were confused. Well, everything seems so different. Are there actual unity? Is the world really unified? I don't think they fundamentally challenged that precept of their teaching, the unity, the existence and surety of unity. And so I think they strive to kind of make sense of how to align, how to make sense of this apparent lack of unity with the ideal unity. So I think that was an intellectual endeavor and project that many of them were engaged in, especially going into the Qing period, and there are a lot of political, turmoils that happened in between. So yeah, actually it was also, I think, questioned by many of the elites themselves, especially given the political and social and intellectual climates that was in the background. Yeah.
Thank you, Dr. Oh. Professor Nylan, would you like to ask some questions or comments?
I just have a quick comment or a quick question. I'm not sure what it is. When I think about Li as inherent pattern, I'm always wondering, and again, I'm coming from my early texts, not from late Imperial China, but are they expecting the same Li to be in everything, or is the difficult insight that each thing has its own Li, its own order, and therefore has intrinsic value? But we don't have to collapse it to a single order. Is that understandable? Yeah.
Yes. I actually think that's what prompted someone like Fang Yizhi to write his text. And he was really struggling. And his argument basically was actually Li that can be found in every particular thing is slightly different. It tells different things, and therefore you have to look at various things because it's not the same. It's just there's no way that you can see one thing and the one Li can be extracted and it's simply applied and it's right. There's no way. So he was basically criticizing many of the former elites and some of the contemporaries for taking such a simple approach. And he was arguing the reason why we actually have to learn broadly. And then he frames it as 直测, investigating of this substance of things. And he's like, it's very, very important that you actually really closely understand every single thing, because actually you learn lowercase p principle from each of it. And in the end, though, when I was reading his text, which I was very fascinated, and I wanted to know the conclusion that he gets out of it, because I think Fang Yizhi still, I think he still was inclined to think that it is possible in the end, when you are finished with this grand project of studying things, it will be possible to get this, unified Li out of it. How? I couldn't find him clarifying the answer. So actually my advisors kept pushing me for it. And my conclusion was, I don't think he found the answer. And perhaps that's why, Woolly Shouts actually is not that long. It sounds encyclopedic, but it's not that long, right? And after that, he actually abandoned this project of this epistemological studies of things. Perhaps he thought answer of understanding this, this ultimate, this knowledge about things, which he would put it as Li, actually doesn't lie there. So after that, he writes about more metaphysical things, right? More about Zhuangzian things. Buddhist things. It really becomes metaphysical. So I was wondering, actually, maybe he was disappointed. I'm not really sure. So that's why I also was kind of, I don't agree with people who like to characterize Wang Yizhi as the early scientist and indicator of the development of science, because it's not very interesting, and he himself abandoned that project. But nonetheless, what he produced was very interesting. And he, as far as I could see, he was one of the very few people who systematically kind of wrote in a very coherent manner how to do it, and why it is important to think about these little individual things. Yeah, I hope I answered the question.
Yeah, thank you, Dr. Oh. Please allow me to introduce our third speaker, Professor Michael Nylan. Professor Michael Nylan was be taught by a number of sinological giants, including Nathan Seven and Michael Loewy, Paul L.M. Saris, William Horn, and Chi-Wan Lee, Henry Rosemont, G.R. and Herbert Fignet. Her current work focuses on political theories and practice of early emperor, where she finds abundant evidence that the Asians were in better shape than we in modern world. She teaches and researches concepts of the body and body politic, on environmental politics and ethics, and on local administration outside the capital at the country and sub-country levels. Her most recent work, reflecting received and extravated texts, including Mammon's co-authored reconstruction and translation of a Han-era documents classic, a co-authored monography on environmental history, tentatively entitled Environmental Equity in China and Beyond. 3 studies of 20th century philosophers reflecting on Imperial Chinese tradition, and a comparison of the histories conceived by Sima Qian and Ban Gu. So, Professor Nylan, the floor is yours.
I'm a historian, and I'm always interested to come into discussions of philosophy. I certainly had some teachers who were philosophers, but I think for me, what I'm always trying to figure out, we get back to a question that Jenny Hong raised: what has value? And it seems to me that philosophy begins, as Pierre Hadot tells us, with a lot of questions about how are we to live. And it's in this connection that I began to think about the human-animal divide. What does that tell us in the way that people in early China looked at the difference between humans and animals? And of course, I cannot but be struck by the difference between Buddhism, which would say sexual desire is a problem, or even late Imperial China, following many of the Neo-Confucians, which absorbed a lot of these Buddhist ideas. I mean, it's not just Mencius who writes that food and sex are our primary needs as human beings, and that it is on that basis, once those desires are fulfilled, obviously in appropriate ways, that we might go on to consider other ethical questions about how are we to live in community. I think I'm sorry, my voice is bad. I have a leftover cold, and my voice is still a bit croaky. I think that one of the things that I'm so aware of in the early period is how much baggage we have to get rid of in the modern period in order to read our texts intelligently. Those of you who read history know that there's a woman called Patricia Crone who dealt with pre-industrial societies. And she had a kind of slogan, and the slogan was "Think away modernity." Well, actually, that's incredibly hard to do, and especially to do it in a sustained fashion. But if we're actually going to learn anything from early texts, we actually probably want to try to think away modernity as much as we can. So what does that mean? Modernity in many of the texts that I know of means a focus on interiority, a focus on agency, a focus on rationality, a focus on autonomy, all of these things. And so thinking about the place of humans and animals in the early period gets me much closer to a different world. Probably people who haven't been working on early notions of animals. Well, they thought otters, for example, performed ritual mourning for their parents. They talked about animals that took care of their young, ducks that were monogamous. They were very much seeing the animal and the human world as continuous, and that each form of life had a kind of integrity and order to it. And so that a central question would be, well, what does it mean to become a human being? That is a central concern of the text. And I'm not just talking Confucian texts. I'm much more interested in reading across different traditions to see what they're talking about. And they are, I think, pretty much at one in coming to conclude that it would be ridiculous to think we're autonomous. It would be ridiculous to see that we have agency. It would be ridiculous to see that we are not as driven by our emotions as by what we might call cognition, knowing things rather than knowing how to do something, haptic knowledge. So it seems to me that they're asking an entirely different set of questions. And I don't mean entirely different from everyone. I've written that there was a whole school of medieval philosophy called vitalism. And I think some of this sounds like Merleau-Ponty today. It's a glancing acquaintance. It's not a fundamental acquaintance. But what are we really talking about? And I think what we're really talking about is thinking hard about what makes people distinctive. Hobbes said that people are distinctive because they take pleasure in killing, and they take pleasure in preeminence, thinking they're better than somebody else. And I think that would not be the question that the thinkers that I work on would say, what is distinctive about a human being? What is different in a human being than what is different from an animal? Heidegger would say that human beings are different because they can imagine their own deaths. I don't think that ever occurred to anyone in early China trying to think what makes human beings distinctive. So what I think I would go back to is the really impressive thinkers that I've read in early China. And they are both trying to establish that we are very much animals. We are called sometimes naked creatures, luochong. We're certainly part of the Wan Wu. But what is our distinctive agenda that separates us from animals? So that's been the question I've been trying to think about. And certainly I think those of us who are interested in modern animal studies, and I am, find it very interesting that we're now finding that elephants perform in ritual ways around the mourning site of members of their group. So part of what we share with animals is this sense of community, that we are not autonomous, that we are dependent upon our community and our tribe, that we have inherited things from those who come before us, everything cultural, in the case of human beings, but of course, elephants and octopi and all these other animal studies, not just homonyms by any means. They have their own cultures of being. So when we talk about human and animals, what I'm interested in the pre-Buddhist world, and I'm so grateful I'm in the pre-Buddhist world, is that the hierarchies of value are much more shifting, much less fixed than I see them in the post-Buddhist world. Of course, I'm a woman, and I think in the post-Buddhist world, I'm supposed to be happy I'm not an animal. I'm supposed to be happy. I'm supposed to be longing to be a man in the early Buddhist set of hierarchies. And I don't actually see much of that playing out in this early world. So Xunzi says, and I'm a big admirer of Xunzi. I guess my two favorite thinkers are Xunzi and Zhuangzi. But I've become very fond of the Guoyu recently. Anyway, the Xunzi would say the only distinctive thing that human beings can do is to make long-term plans for the common good. And I think that's a pretty good definition of what is feasible and extremely difficult to achieve. So when Xunzi is talking about people who can make long-term plans for the common good, he's certainly talking to members of the governing elite whose responsibility it is to make plans for others, to decide how they'll be taxed, who will serve in government, how will they be judged if wrongdoing has occurred, all of this. So that would be Xunzi's answer. And I go back and forth. Zhuangzi is such a difficult text, and it was probably a much more composite text than the Xunzi. So there's certainly many more voices in it. But certainly he comes close to telling us that the highest realization we can have as humans is to realize that we're totally limited. And so is every other creature. And because of chi theory, which I think we tend to forget, the world of pre-Buddhist China is not a world that imagines there can be permanence or that permanence in any way, shape, or form is a value. So the question is rather how to be living in the midst of change, accepting one's place in that order. And to posit an order is a rather major thing. And yet I cannot think of a single early Chinese thinker or statesman who doesn't assume that there is an order. And that if we can somehow learn to trust to the order to find our own appropriate place in that order, that is enough for us as human beings. So I would tie this all to my present distaste for abstractions, to the order that we find ourselves in today, where power is of absolute value and money is power. And we are ceaselessly trashing the environment for rational reasons. I think if we adopted any of the insights from the early period, we would know that we are totally dependent on the entire ecosystem. And in that sense, we are one body. We've been talking about one body in both the previous papers to some degree. And so the question that Zhuangzi would ask us, and to me it's the central question of Zhuangzi, is how can we keep on doing as we have been doing and expect to flourish? So I think I want to leave it there. I had a much more complicated set of remarks based on a paper I did about humans and animals and the human-animal divide. But I think coming out of a paper on Buddhism and late Ming notions of Ge Wu, it seems only appropriate to be asking ourselves, what do we hold to be valuable, and why do all of these systems of belief, and maybe I'm wrong, but posit some kind of an order which will allow us to learn how to live our lives. Anyway, I'm sure I'm rambling and I didn't follow any of my prepared remarks. I'm more or less responding, I think, to the two previous papers. So.
Yeah, thank you, Professor Nylan. Dr. Wu, would you ask some like to ask some question or have some comments?
Yeah, sorry. Yeah, well, I actually was well, the remarks that you had are important question that we probably will need to think about for the rest of our lives, many, many times, probably every day. So not really questions, but then
So the one question I have is philosophy not supposed to keep reminding us insistently that these are the questions we need to be thinking about? Or is it supposed to distract us from these questions? Because sometimes I feel abstractions are simply distractions. You know, they're rabbit holes we go down.
well, I'm a simple person, and so I personally do prefer to kind of veer away from the abstractions and think about start from the
Yeah.
yeah
So I
specific
found it
items.
very, very interesting that you said Feng Li-zhi, after this project, went off to being Taoist and Buddhist, and then you use the word abstraction in terms, and I guess I wonder whether I think that's what he was doing when he went there,
Yeah.
or whether he was looking another way to find a body, a single
Mhm.
body.
Mhm. I think it's I can't say much. I actually was trying to read Dong Xijun, and I couldn't understand it. So I struggled with like one chapter and then okay, maybe later, and then I did. But then I think it's the letter that he thought I think answer actually lied in this bigger philosophical question. They are really worth thinking about, especially after all this life crisis that he went through. I think he found more meanings in those things rather than the world of things.
But what if
And
you saw those as a continuum rather than as opposed one to the other?
one could, I suppose.
Yeah, I think
Yeah,
Zhuangzi would see them as a
for
continuum.
sure, for sure. I think the one
Because-
limit, right? Yeah, and probably the comments that I'm giving are probably is quite limited. Maybe probably because I'm just focused on people who are just thinking about things. Yeah. But and nonetheless, I think none of them were satisfied with simply talking about things in the end, anyways. Because that's in the end that's 小时. And so what is the 大大师, right? The great knowledge. Apparently it's not Uli. It's
Mhm.
and that kind of makes me to think Uli in our modern world now it means physics, and then now the physicists hold this, I guess, authority to dictate what is true, right? What is true of this universe, and we can really find it. And
I don't think the physicists who are first-rate physicists would say that about themselves.
that is true, because they do have questions, but then I think
And they mostly talk of their theories rather than their absolute
because
knowledge.
right, because they don't have the evidence yet for everything.
Right.
But then nonetheless, popular idea is that physicists do, and then and people don't really read physicists' research, and they look at the media and movies, and we are led to believe that science actually solves many things, and absolutely everything. And so what is philosophy doing? What is humanity doing? Maybe it's not that important. So something to think about, especially in this world that generates so many informations that are hard to decide the informational values, and the notion of truth itself is so malleable, so that well, it's nothing to do with the animal thing. But the one thing that I was thinking about was this the qi, and its enabling of I guess transition between human and non-human. And because I was actually I had no time, so I didn't really talk about it. But if you read BG in later Chinese writings, then you do see people talking about objects, especially human figures or even just daily objects or even animals becoming something that approaching human because they acquire human qi. And basically that kind of implies that, well, what does it is the human non-human divide absolute? Maybe it's not. But are the transformed beings humans just like us? And it seems like all kinds of literature, these small 志怪 stuff, seems to be playing with this idea of, are they really human? Maybe they're even more human than we are, or maybe they're not because of this and that. And yeah, and I read one story about marionette coming alive because it was so old, and they actually acted as humans, but the humans saw it and then were horrified, and then they burned everything. So that's something about human fear of non-human thing becoming human seems also interesting to me. And perhaps I don't know if that's particular to, maybe later periods. I'm not really sure. Yeah, but some things that I was thinking about when I was listening to your presentation, and especially your brief mentioning of the importance of qi, because I do think it is of the central importance of how people think about not just how what it means to be humans, but then actually to be in this world. They live in the world of qi, and I think that's very central and important to recognize.
Yeah, thank you, Dr. Oh. Professor Hon, would you like to comment a bit?
Yes, I have two questions about Professor Nylan's claim that the pre-Buddhist Chinese were as less hierarchical. So I agree with you regarding Zhuangzi, because when I read Zhuangzi, it seems like he's trying to overturn the hierarchy set by Confucians. He said, well, being useless is actually good. Who knows whether death is worse than life, or who knows whether being a high status person is better than being a low status person. So I see a lot of claims against the idea of hierarchy in Zhuangzi's text. But for Confucian text, I was wondering how you interpret, for example, the Wulun, for example, the relationship between a king and their knights, the relationship between a husband and a wife, the relationship between the father and the son, etc. Do you regard these as hierarchy? And what do you think about the Book of Changes saying that Tian, the heaven, is superior to the earth, Di?
I'm sorry,
Because
heaven is
Tian,
above and earth is below. That's different than
yeah,
superior and inferior, because the word heaven refers to the skies as well as. So I think people read these texts without much context and pick up little phrases. But what I would like to say about the world, and I can certainly say it about Xunzi, is that he believes that order implies hierarchies, but those hierarchies must be based on the principle of worth. And Dong Zhongshu said, if you're a son and you don't, the father doesn't treat the son in the way a father should, the son is allowed not to treat the father as a father. In other words, there's much more emphasis on social construction once one delves deeply into these texts, and much more emphasis on cross-cutting hierarchies. For example, there are many spheres of life, and I think it's because we're living in a closer to an aristocratic age where there's a lot of intermarriage between prominent families. But I don't see a systematic devaluation of women per se. What I see is a fear that women in the palace will start jockeying to change the order of succession. So I think what people do when they read these texts, they come to them with a lot of presuppositions about what a Confucian text should say, or what a Taoist text should say. And actually, once you start reading in them across the board, you realize there is a very strong common discourse. And even if you, I mean, people who work in early China have done quite a lot of work on this, saying these schools didn't exist, everybody was borrowing from everybody else. What one wanted to do was get the best set of theories about how to live one's life. And because only people in the governing elite could actually read these books, something we forget, of course, they are focusing on how should members of the governing elite. But Xunzi says it's perfect, and so does Mencius, it's perfectly proper to get rid of a ruler who is not doing the ruler's job. Now, you won't find anything that revolutionary in most other texts until you get to the 18th century. And I'm not even sure the French Revolution is that revolutionary. So it's asking people in their positions to do what is required in that position to the best of their abilities. But I don't see what I do see in late Imperial China, a huge emphasis on filial piety as probably the supreme virtue. I think that comes out of the very different social arrangements that pertained in the family in late Imperial China, where the family was a corporation and you can only have one CEO. There's quite a different morphology of the family in the early period, and quite a bit more cross-cousin marriages where families generation after generation were exchanging daughters and sons, and they expected those daughters and sons to be treated properly. And so reading, rather than picking from here or there, but reading across these texts, I think gives you an incredibly different picture of what is going on. And I think the main thing that is going on is a belief that if you don't believe there's an order, and you don't believe part of that order depends on people taking both positions of power and positions of powerlessness, you really can't have an order. You can't have people move in a hierarchy, and the only healthy kind of hierarchy has movement in it. You'll have no sense of reciprocity. And I mean, Yang Liansheng said the primary Chinese virtue is reciprocity, that one owes to people what one has gotten from people. And so many of these bonds are differently construed in early China than they would be in later periods. And, you know, I can go into this at length, but I don't think we have at length, so I'll stop there. Yeah.
Yeah,
Thank you so much for your
the-
explanation.
Yeah, thank you all. And now we have the time for open discussion. If anyone have a question or comments, please just raise your hand and ask the speakers.
And let me start off by saying I wasn't sure that tonight we weren't going to talk about animal rights, but okay. Okay. So I think questions could be fairly freewheeling.
Yeah. So, is there any questions?
Until someone comes up with a question, I'll just ask a simple question. Professor Nylan, do you think early Chinese thinkers were interested in thinking about whether animals have good or bad nature at all? Do they have such?
No, they don't think in terms of good and bad. That's the wrong question. Okay.
What kinds of questions that
So,
they were? Mhm.
Shin means something that's ugly to see, like a toddler hitting a fellow toddler on the head with a toy.
Mhm.
It's not a pretty sight to see, and that's how it's always construed until much later. So good and bad is not here. It's a different set of questions. Are you fulfilling the function that is your potential? And so they're thinking, what are the potentialities we share with animals? And what is distinctive, if anything, about us? And so Shunza makes the offhand comment that nearly any animal can outrun us, apes and parrots can talk. What is it? So they're interested in thinking about humans to think, what is the distinctive human project? Because if it's not, they thought if we don't think hard about that, we won't be able to talk about what's a feasible and just social order. In other words, you can't ask humans to do the impossible. So, what is possible and desirable for humans to do? And how can they be schooled, and not by book learning, by emulation, to be more constructive and less destructive? I mean, I keep in my mind coming back to Hobbes, maybe because I've just been reading him recently, saying that the only thing humans are distinctive in is their pleasure in killing and their present pleasure in feeling superior to others. That's absolutely not what Shunza would say is the only capacity of humans that is distinctive. So there's a very famous book called, not famous enough outside anthropology, by Marshall Solins, who said, "The Western Illusion of Human Nature." And I think in Western, he would include Buddhism because, of course, Northern India was part of Persia at that time, very much influenced by the same ideas that were going on in Persia. But there, the forces of good and evil are locked in eternal battle. But he says, if you go anywhere else outside this world, and he was an anthropologist going many places outside the basically Mediterranean way of viewing good and evil, he said, people, if you ask them what human nature is, this would not be their answer, that it's this endless battle between good and evil. They would come up with, well, this is what we do. This is what we as a community do. And then they would begin to describe their lives and what happens when it works well and what stresses and strains are on their lives. So I think the early Chinese are much closer to that.
Yeah, thank you, Professor Nathan. Is there any
Robin
question?
asked a question. Yes.
Yeah.
I wish I could see you, Robin, but I can't. But anyway, I do think we can learn a lot from animals. Hey, I do think we can learn a lot from animals. And I have spent a lot of my life around animals in one way or another. And one can see when one is putting stresses and strains on them, and when they are also having trouble in community because of that. So for me, I think a central issue is under what conditions does anything flourish? And so I spend a lot of time looking at animals and thinking about how they're flourishing or not. In my garden, when I grew up, having animals around the house, all of this. So I think I used to have on my refrigerator a picture of a cat that was simply relaxed. And I had that on my refrigerator until I left the skylight open and it all became wet and the colors ran and it was totally destroyed. But how is it that a cat can express pleasure so profoundly and be so totally relaxed? I'm not sure humans are ever going to get there, but I think one can look at that and spend some time thinking about that. What would you like to say, Robin?
Well, I just think
An interesting question.
I agree with you to asking the question, oh, what is the difference between humans and animals, and whether animal has X, Y, Z, or humans has Y, Z. It's a wrong question, and that we actually want to look at. I think right now, I think the animal actually can teach human beings a quite good lessons.
Well, I think the primary lesson they know, especially if you watch them in the wild, is Jurzu, know what is enough.
Yeah. Yes.
They
Yes.
know what is enough to sustain the group.
Yes.
And they do not exceed
No greedy. Yes.
the kind of greed that humans have
Yes.
is simply unknown. So yeah.
Well, I guess Paul bringing the cat in, I think a cat at least taught the human how to be gentle or care for a human beings, just
Yes.
being cat. So my question will be, do you think ox in Kukuding's story actually taught human beings something? So that's why I was thinking, actually, animals can be teacher for humans.
Absolutely.
Mentors.
Absolutely.
Yeah. Guide
Absolutely.
human beings. Human beings.
I absolutely think that. And because I think in early China that they're not thinking that one thing I think that separates early from later is we can talk about qi in later, but it's a completely different qi as conceptualized. So qi is material, but in my period, qi is all there is, and it's self-organizing principle.
Right.
And so how does it go self-organizing materiality? How does it go wrong, so badly wrong with humans? And so I don't think these early texts, which are bringing up animals all the time, and every once in a while bringing up anomalous cases where a dog is acting like a human and pondering, is this a good thing or a bad thing? I did my thesis on the Guaishen chapter, focused on the Guaishen chapter in the Feng Shui Tong Yi. So I'm interested in what are things we cannot figure out and how do we approach them when we can't figure them out. But I think animals keep drifting in and out of the histories, the classics, the masterworks, you name it, in early China. Because, first of all, we are animals.
Yeah.
And if we forget that basic fact about ourselves, that we're neither the swiftest nor the strongest nor the thisest nor the thatest, we have forgotten the first lesson that we need to know, which is we have many, many limitations. And that is where we should begin with everything we begin with. So for me, I think these animals are meant to be teachers. I don't think for them it's a fun fact that a parrot can talk. I think they're then wondering, well, do we do anything distinctive when we talk?
Mhm.
And I suspect Zhuangzi would say not much. And I'm not even sure that Xunzi's answer would be all that different, because Xunzi says language is convention, and we move out of that community and the convention no longer works. But certainly gestural movements are as important as language in anybody who's thinking about ritual behavior. So I do think animals are our teachers, and it's not that they're there for us,
No.
but if we're
Well, that's a
curious,
human-centered wrong
exactly,
framework to think
exactly,
about the world.
exactly.
Right?
It's not that they're there for us, but that they are there for in our world
Yes.
should cause us to reflect
Right.
on what are we doing.
Yeah. Oops.
Yeah.
Something is that time is ended or something.
Somebody
Okay.
wanted to share a whiteboard, but I don't know where it went. Okay. Yeah. So I think I totally
think
get your question, and I totally like your question. That I think we're often so intent upon describing humans as having a unique problem, and that unique problem is our agency and our consciousness and our thisness and our thatness. Whereas I think I've been persuaded by all of my teachers, including Herb Fingerette and Nathan Sivan, certainly Henry Rosemont, all of them, I think, have said, let's get a better set of questions.
Right.
And that is what we should be focused on. And we probably won't have answers for half those questions, but simply challenging ourselves to think of better questions will do something that is human and appropriate for us. Yeah.
Yeah. I think there is two faulty statement or claims. One is humans and myriad other things, animals, plants, trees, humans, and nature. So that's dichotomy. That's a problem. The next problem is subject and object. Oh, humans,
Yes,
subject.
absolutely.
And then we look at everything's object, and then we want to somehow take,
I totally agree.
Yeah,
And
it's resources. Yeah.
yeah, and I don't think these ideas, I had trouble. I just came out.
You're
Let's
fine.
see.
Just keep talking.
Okay, you can see me, but I went black on my screen. Okay. I think these are actually early modern questions, and I
Yeah.
think Bruno Latour taught us that. So these are historical questions that even if we're looking backwards, those questions aren't really very good questions to be asking if we hope to learn anything about the early period. Yeah.
It is derived from Newtonian physics. It's Europeans' Enlightenment's problem. You know, they always think about humans become the center of universe, and then they take control. Knowledge is power, and we want to get everything, you know, under humans' control. So basically, by bring this dynamic the world into laboratory, so human beings end up to see the world in this way. So if we come back to pre-moderns, then we will see very different pictures. So and even contemporary science tell us, no, that picture to understand the world, that the dichotomies has a problem. So we need to deconstruct it and thinking in more, you know, big picture holistically. Earlier, I want also make a quick question about the distinction between invest 格物 and cultivation. So I think it's a very good question because actually in the earlier, I mean, for some Chinese way to think about the 格物 is open yourself to transformation. It's not about subject and object to getting the objective knowledge, but rather through 格物 to look at the myriad of things, you learn something, and then you 观了奇妙, you look at the mystery of the world, and then you transformed. You know,
Right.
so the outcome is not the product, the body of so-called knowledge, but rather you actually, through this process, you become a certain kind of person. So
Yes.
yeah.
I think I would agree with that. And I certainly think if we're looking, and Joo-hyeon mentioned physics, and I read a lot of physics, and I don't think the people who actually do physics are like pop physics necessarily, what they're trying to tell us. But I also read a lot of neuroscience, and I think what they're telling us is how we experience the world. We are changed as the world is changing around us. And meanwhile, our neural pathways are being carved in certain ways by the values that we put on those experiences. And so Buddhism asks a central question: how does value and experience, how do they relate? But I think this is also a question that many other philosophies and religions have asked, is are we to learn to value more of experience, or basically less, and then control that lesser bit? And so I remember reading someone who was writing about the emotions. It's a really great book, and I'm blanking out on the author's name. But he said that the goal of ethical life is to move one's experience and compassion and care in ever wider circles. And certainly I think if that is, I think that's a goal that we find reiterated in a lot of different places. But humans seem to be pretty bad at that. And maybe I'm just reflecting on bad politics around the world these days. But maybe if we got back to the fundamentals of what is it that we can do as human beings that is worth doing, and that calls upon us in distinctively human ways, not denying we're animals, because boy, we certainly are. We're part of the one wu, and we simply don't have fur. That's it. So we have less protection than most
Yeah, maybe I can come up with a question. I think with your question, how humans should extend their emotions toward, more in the bigger, with this skill. And then there's two questions when in Chinese early text, you see one is humans' heart, mind, 人心, and the heart, mind, and for heaven and the earth should be connected. And then another one is talk about the humans' emotion, 情. And then the 天地之情, the 情 of heaven and the earth. So how you can tone 情 of heaven and earth? What do you think? How do you connect the 心 of
Well,
art
I
of
think-
mind, 天地之心?
I think the interesting thing, of course, about the Qing is that it's both emotions and conditions, so the human condition, the cosmic condition, the Tiandi as the cosmic order. But it's very important that the notion that there is an order there that
Right.
you can learn to trust to, but you have to be rather observant of how that order works
Right.
before you fling yourself. I mean, you have to know there's gravity before you fling yourself off the side of a cliff. It's as simple as that. You need to understand that what are the limitations of all of these things on us. And I don't mean limitations in a bad way. It sounds like a bad thing, but it's simply the reality. It's the conditions of things as they are.
Yeah, do you think a book of change actually mentioned this? See, you look at the sky, look at the cosmos, you look at terrain, and then you look at your body. So ultimately, you learn from your body. Your body really tell you, give you your limitations. You want to run faster, your leg not listening, right? You want to stand up, you need to sleep.
Right.
All this kind of your body actually teaching you something to say, hey, you
Absolutely.
have limitations.
So
Mhm.
I always love the Taoist diagram. Everybody knows it, where it's a Taoist body, but in fact, the sun and moon are the eyes. And, the spine is a marvelous kind of mountain. Yeah. Because I have become more and more convinced, and I'll never be able to prove it because we don't have enough evidence of something that I think someone has talked about in Greek studies, that Greek medicine gave all of the philosophers the metaphors they were using in their philosophy.
Healers, yes.
And yes, if we think about that makes sense to me. And she's pretty much shown it to be so, I think, convincingly. I think the same is true when you look at the case of China, what we call early China, the early empires in the area we know as China. These metaphors of interdependent bodies resonating with each other across time and space are far more powerful. We've kind of shoved them to the side to get our own notions of what we prefer to see in them. But I'm sorry, I think these are fundamental to everything I'm reading. And a fundamental grappling with how is it that we both stay the same and change, that we are identifiable as something when we are never the same. How is it? One of the things they say about humans that is different than animals is we are we are capable of adapting ourselves to a wider variety of habitats. And I think that's a very interesting observation, because I sometimes think we habituate ourselves to inhuman habitats and just begin to regard them as natural. And okay, this is the way this works, you know. I'm not sure that's always a benefit. That we are the most adaptable creature in terms of our habitats. So I think about that a lot. How can people live through the things they live through? And how do we expect them to come out whole and intact? That is the goal. Not to be whole physically, but to be whole in whatever changed state we are, whole and intact. So what does that even mean when we're disintegrating? What does it even mean? I think one can still be whole and intact, or aim for that, that one has a kind of integrity. After all, that's what oneness means, to have a kind of integrity. So anyway, Robin, you and I have probably been crowding out anybody else. I'd love to hear.
I know.
But I love talking with you. Sorry.
I
But
need to stop. Yes.
no, I'm not saying you to stop. I'm saying me to stop.
Okay,
But
thank you. Thank you, Professor Wong, for your questions, and thank you, Professor Nylan, Dr. Hong, and Dr. Wu, and Professor Hong, and thanks everyone for joining us. I'm sorry that the time is up, so have a nice day, and
Thank
see you
you.
again.
Thank you. Thank you.
Thank you.
Time is out. I saw the way.
Yeah.
I saw that you got the. Okay.